Well, yet more weird and bizarre questions of Boris Johnson's bizarre, well, almost paid for diplomacy expertise. But for those of you who don't know what's been going on, who might have missed this just in case, here's the quick TDLR going on. In case you don't know, at the moment, Venezuela has lined up its troops quite nicely along the Guianan border and even had its own mini referendum to say, hey, do you want us to annex, like, pretty much most of Guianan territory and, just take all that stuff, for us? Quite concerning. And of course, a lot of people quite worried about that. The Guianans have obviously responded with their own troops. Even Brazil has moved troops up there. We've sent a destroyer off the coast of Guyana as well. So too has America in response to this as well. Needless to say, so far things haven't exactly escalated, but they haven't de-escalated either. Still a potential trouble spot. So it was really bizarre to honestly hear about the fact that Boris Johnson was going on a diplomatic mission to Venezuela to meet with Maduro. Now, that in itself is is quite bizarre because at the time, and even in my original video, I said, why on earth would David Cameron send Boris Johnson to go meet with Maduro? And I have to sort of again correct myself because we later found out, or after later information we found out, Cameron and the people at the Foreign Office had no idea that this meeting was going to happen until Johnson was halfway there. At which point he then went to meet the UK ambassador, and I say ambassador in air quotes because we don't have a proper embassy set up in Venezuela, so he's not a an ambassador as we would sort of recognize him, but he's sort of like, he pretty much fulfills the role of an ambassador. So he went to see him, then he goes to see Maduro, and then he goes back to see him, and then he flies off. And all this was heavily funded by a guy who is again former Venezuelan, runs a very, very big hedge fund to try and quote promote UK Venezuelan friendship. We still don't know fully what happened in this meeting, what was discussed, what was talked about. We heard some of the stuff that Boris apparently talked to him about Ukraine, because we know the previous week before, Lavrov had been doing a rounds of other countries that were sort of favorable to sort of Russia's cause. We know that obviously the Venezuelan government supporting Russia in this, and the key worry here would be if Venezuela were to start sort of supporting Russia by giving them arms, ammunitions, etc. It would be something that the world at this point would have to sort of respond to. Given, of course, very recently they've vetoed the continuation of the sanction monitoring team on the North Koreans. Quite worrying. But don't worry, something we'll be talking about in Geoscope. So go check that out. But yes, this now has continued on. And it has continued on. And I said this is well worth sort of covering and sort of keeping a focus on, because it looks like Boris here is going to be in an even bigger world of trouble. So we're going to keep on having a look at this because Labour is now putting pressure on the Foreign Office to say, hey, this really needs to be sorted out because it looks like there's a lot of bit of wrongdoing. Well, not wrongdoing, but shall we say improper conduct going on here, which, well, again, it's Boris Johnson, so we shouldn't really be surprised by by an accusation of improper conduct. But before we do go more into this, please do remember to click on the like, the share, and the subscribe button down below. Anyway, after that brief call interruption, I don't know if you heard my phone going off there, but anyway, let's get into this. So we're talking about, of course, Boris Johnson. What's happened? What's going to be the follow-up? And will there be some severe consequences for this? Now, of course, Johnson, former prime minister, there are a lot of sort of rules and regulations they have to do. Did this breach those rules? Let's have a look what's going on here. So This comes from The Guardian with the title of Potentially Serious Impropriety. Labour questions Johnson's Venezuelan meeting. So Labour is demanding answers over what the party said would be potentially serious impropriety by Boris Johnson after it emerged that the former Prime Minister met with the Venezuelan president in his role as a consultant for a hedge fund. Nick Thomas-Symonds, the shadow Cabinet Office Minister, said in a letter to Oliver Dowden, the Deputy Prime Minister and the Cabinet Office Minister, that there were very concerns that Johnson may have breached the Ministerial Code. Under the Code, ministers must seek the advice of an advisory committee on business appointments, it's COBA, and the watchdog over any appointments that they take up within 2 years of leaving office. And bear in mind, it is very clear no one knew about this. So it is obviously this was not covered at all under the COBA meetings or the committee. Like I say, the Foreign Office only knew about it when Johnson was already traveling there. So yeah, it is very likely he very much did break ministerial code over this. So Johnson, who quit as Prime Minister back in September of 2022, held discussions with Nicolás Maduro, the Venezuelan president, back in early February. The trip was reported by the Sunday Times and was arranged part of his work as a consultant to Merlin Advisors, a London-based hedge fund. The fund's coordinator is now seeking to try and improve relations between Venezuela and the Western countries, including the UK, according to the Financial Times. Last week, The Guardian reported that Johnson had not sought COBA's advice for this role. So a source close to Johnson also reiterated earlier comments saying that the rules had not been broken and suggested that no work had been undertaken that would require an application to a COBA. Seems to me, I think that if you are going to, you are the former prime minister and you are going to be visiting another head of state, certainly falls within that 2-year time gap. Yeah, you probably should be seeking, you know, but of course, this is Boris Johnson. Are we shocked that Johnson broke more rules? Oh, Boris Johnson breaking rules? Imagine my shock. Anyway, in his letter, Thomas-Symonds wrote that Mr. Johnson's repeated failure to abide by the ministerial code demonstrate his complete lack of respect and regard for standards in public life, the essential safeguards to try and protect the public interest. He also expressed concerns at the separate reports that Johnson had been supported and briefed by the Foreign Office before the visit, saying that this serious allegation now questions both the government's commitment to ensuring the adherence of the rules and to which intended to guard against potential corruption and serious impropriety and used publicly funded government resources for the benefit of private interests. Those are Mr. Johnson, Merlin Advisors, and their clients. So, once again, questions also should be asked about the Foreign Office. You know, they only knew about it when Johnson was going, but for some reason they still signed off on it. I still can't believe that they allowed this to go to head. But there you go. Anyway, in a series of questions, Thomas did ask Dowden to set out what the Cabinet Office knew in advance of this meeting and Johnson's role with Merlin Advisors, and explained the briefings and resources provided Johnson. He wrote, we are calling on you to launch an urgent investigation into this matter to try and identify the role of the current ministers and the use of government resources in relation to any potential breach of the rules. In also separate complaint, Thomas said that Rishi Sunak also promised a government of integrity at every level, but once again, it now appears to be one rule for the Conservatives and another for everyone else. The former Prime Minister's visit to Venezuela does raise serious questions, not only about his lobbying activities, but also what the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary knew about what publicly funded assistance was offered. Again, we don't know fully what was talked about. We've only heard what Boris Johnson aides have said what was talked about and what we mentioned. We do know that we only knew that the Foreign Office learned about this, mid-flight. You kind of think the Foreign Office would turn around and go, you can't really do that, Boris. Probably, best to check with us first. This seems to be something that could get very, very messy very, very quickly if this does escalate and we do find out more information what went on behind the scenes in this idea. So it is good to see that they are sort of really pushing to sort of go in and around this, and of course asking sort of the Foreign Office what went on here, what did they know, when did they know it, and the big question is, why on earth would you agree for Boris Johnson to sort of act as a paid for diplomat to try and improve the relations between Venezuela and the rest of the Europe? Well, the rest of the world in many cases, but this story continues. I of course it will not be surprising if we see Johnson probably potentially dragged once again before a committee hearing to explain what was going on here. Not only potentially Johnson in this case, but potentially also Cameron and probably other aides to find out what was going on here. So we'll see what happens in that regard. But of course, if anything updates to this happening or anything like that, we'll keep you in the loop. So as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.